This video is going to be quite controversial. If it gets taken down by YouTube, I'll post it on my Rumble channel and other social media outlets. Please don't be triggered by the controversial nature of this. This is a very important health topic that's not talked about enough. There's been some recent legal developments in the fluoride question, fluoridated water. And I'm going to be talking with an attorney today who is leading the charge to wake people up about the dangers of fluoridated water. So my guest today, Mr. Michael Connett, who is an attorney for the Fluoride Action Network, who I've been following for more than a decade and working quietly in the background because for quite a few years there, talking about fluoridated water was a third rail issue. If you even mentioned it, you would be immediately named a kook and canceled. And I think that we have enough research now and enough legal momentum that we can actually talk about this out loud. So, Mr. Connett, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Berry. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
So, give everybody a brief snippet about the Fluoride Action Network and what you guys have been up to since what, 2005 or 2000?
Yeah, the Fluoride Action Network was formed in 2000. It was a clearinghouse of citizen groups and concerned individuals, with the point being to raise awareness about the toxicity of fluoride compounds so that people can make more informed decisions about how to best use fluoride or not use fluoride. And that's basically the purpose of the group, and it's been operating since then.
Yeah. So I've got a story to tell you about the small community where I practice medicine. We'll talk about that later. A lot of people are probably not aware of that. There's been some recent legal proceedings in California that have spurred a lot of renewed interest in the fluoridated water questions. Can you kind of break the facts of that case down and tell us what the judge decided?
Certainly. We filed this case back in 2017 under a federal statute called the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA. TSCA gives EPA the authority to ban the particular use of a chemical that poses an unreasonable risk to human health. And we argued and presented substantial evidence on that fluoridation chemicals, this particular use of fluoride, adding it to drinking water, poses an unreasonable risk of adverse neurodevelopmental effects on the developing brain. And we've been litigating this case for 7 years. The court had 2 trials in the case where it heard extensive expert testimony on both sides. And in September of this year, a few weeks ago, the court finally entered its ruling, and the court concluded, based on the entirety of the evidence, that adding fluoride chemicals to drinking water does pose an unreasonable risk to human health in the form of reduced IQ in children.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, this is the first case where all of the evidence has been considered. There have been other lawsuits in the past and other legal proceedings, but typically a lot of stuff has not been included. But I think, is it true that this is the first time that a judge has actually been able to hear both sides of the argument completely and come to this kind of decision?
It's the first federal court that has done so. There have been 3 state courts in the past, back in the 70s and 80s, that heard evidence on fluoride's toxicity and made rulings of findings of fact that fluoridation poses a risk to human health. This was a federal court. And also in this case, to be clear, the court only looked at evidence on neurotoxicity, evidence on fluoride and the brain. The court didn't consider other health concerns with fluoride exposure, like arthritis and bone fracture and thyroid disease and other concerns. It was focused strictly on the neurotoxicity issue.
Yeah, and which I consider to be a very large issue. I have 6 children, And when I was a young physician back in 2002, 2003, I heard some rumor about, fluoridated water may not be good for kids. And I didn't know anything about it. I was never taught anything about it in medical school, except that it's a good thing. Don't worry about it. And so I thought, well, that's weird that somebody would say that's a bad thing. And so I started to really look into it, and I found that there's an extensive body of research about this, much of it done in other countries, China, the Nordic countries, and other places that show a pretty darn clear, strong association between the degree of fluoridation in the water and children's IQ and the IQ that they carry with them through the remainder of their life. And and some of it's not even in English. Some of it you have to, put into a translator or something, or pay somebody to translate it. And so based on that, back in 2003, I got a reverse osmosis filter for the house, and we started, because at that time our city water was fluoridated. And we started to we stopped using all fluoridated water, and then also just switched off of fluoride toothpaste as well, especially for the children. Because I looked at the other side, it's like, okay, well, what's this huge benefit to children of drinking fluoridated water? What's the, if a woman's pregnant, does drinking fluoridated water, does that make her unborn child's teeth just resilient against cavities and dental abscesses? And when I started looking at the research supporting fluoridation, that's when I was like, oh yeah, we're never drinking fluoridated water again. This is foolishness. And so you guys have been working on this since 2000. And I think was it your father that actually founded the Fluoride Action Network?
Yes, he was one of the founders. There was a number of founding members. And Dr. Berry, if I could add a point to what you just said about the potential benefits of fluoride during the prenatal period. Because as you know, it's the prenatal period that is a period of life where there's a heightened vulnerability to fluoride's neurotoxic effects. For a number.
So when a woman is pregnant and the baby's developing in her uterus, in her belly, that's what you're talking about.
That's right. And in this case, I had the opportunity to depose a representative of the Centers for Disease Control, the director of CDC's Oral Health Division. And I asked him if there are any benefits to the teeth from prenatal exposures to fluoride when the baby's in the womb. Is there any benefit to the teeth? Answer, no. There's no known benefits to the teeth from exposing the child in utero. I also asked Mr. Hannon, the CDC representative, is there any benefits to the newborn infant for the first 6 months of life before the teeth erupt from swallowing fluoride? And the answer again was no, there are no known benefits to the baby from swallowing fluoride during the early infancy period. And I think that's a really important fact because those are the life stages in utero, early infancy, where you have the greatest risk to the brain from fluoride exposure. There's several reasons for that. One, the brain's undergoing rapid development, and that makes the brain more vulnerable to a toxic insult. Two, the brain during that period of time does not have a well-developed blood-brain barrier, so the fluoride that's circulating in the system will have access to the brain. And then to compound that even further, we have many children in this country, as you well know, who don't have the luxury of being breastfed. There are many parents who can't breastfeed, and so they have to use formula. And many parents use formula made with tap water. Well, a baby who is receiving formula made with tap water receives a very high dosage of fluoride as a function of body weight. And what's striking is that a breastfed baby receives the lowest dose of fluoride among all age groups in the population because breast milk contains very, very little fluoride, essentially no fluoride. And you flip that on its head when you formula feed a baby with fluoridated water. So this is a period of time where there's a heightened vulnerability. So there's a risk. And yet, according to CDC's representative in this lawsuit, there's no benefit during that time. And I really think that's something that policymakers should be aware of. You have a situation where there is no benefit, only risk during this important period of life, which I think highlights the problem with water fluoridation, where you're exposing everyone in the population, regardless of whether they need it or want it or otherwise, to fluoride.
Yep, I totally agree. And just a note to the people watching this on YouTube or Rumble if it gets taken off YouTube. This is being recorded live in front of our private community, thousands of people in this community. And they will, if it's okay with Mr. Connett, I'm going to entertain some questions from our tribe members as we go along. And so if you'd like to become part of this community and be able to ask questions to experts in different fields, just like Mr. Connett, consider becoming a tribe member. There's a link in the show notes. So I don't think that the research is clear whether this fluoridation that the baby's exposed to in the womb, in mom's belly, and then in the first 6 months of their life before they even have any teeth that have been erupted, I don't think it's clear whether the fluoride is having a direct effect on the brain or the fluoride's negative effect on the thyroid gland of the baby, which is known as the master gland. Everybody pretty much knows that, because the effects on thyroid health are huge. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's not a direct effect on the developing fetal brain and infant brain. That would not surprise me at all, but absolutely the thyroid gland is in charge of so many things with regard to brain development and the development of IQ. There's so many places where fluoride in the circulation of either an unborn child or a newborn child, there's absolutely no benefit. The CDC is on record saying there's no benefit to a fetus or to an infant without teeth. So then you have to say, well, what's the risk? Okay, if there's no benefit whatsoever, are you saying it's completely risk-free? And I think this recent ruling in the Northern District of California makes it blatantly clear. What was the exact language that the judge's ruling used again? What was the exact wording?
That fluoridation at 0.7 parts per million, the so-called optimal level, presents, quote, an unreasonable risk of reduced IQ in children, unquote.
And so that's an astounding statement by a federal district judge. I have been watching this case since it dropped in 2024, and I've been watching what the kind of regulatory bodies, the medical, the dental, and so already the CDC, the American Academy of the Dental Academy, and the American Academy of Pediatrics have already issued press releases saying, hey, we stand by water fluoridation. We don't think it causes any problems or any harm, and we want you to keep drinking fluoridated water as a pregnant woman, or keep making infant formula with fluoridated water for your infant who does not have any teeth. Now, people who watch my channel, they're well aware of what we call scientific inertia. Like, even after something has been demonstrably proven to be harmful or to give no benefit whatsoever, doctors and dentists and other medical professionals will just keep repeating the same. I call it a lie, because it's a lie. There is no benefit. But if you ask the average dentist or the average doctor, the average pediatrician, is it a good thing? Is there benefit to a pregnant woman drinking fluoridated water or making baby infant formula with fluoridated water? The vast majority would say, oh, yeah, sure. Everybody knows that. So part of why I started this YouTube channel was to call out obviously egregious lies that could be causing harm to pregnant mothers and infants and people of all ages and races and ethnicities. You need to know the truth about this. And that's why I decided to do this video today, even though it may get me in trouble. What other organizations or associations have come out despite what the judge found on hearing both sides of this argument and looking at all the evidence what other regulatory bodies have said, yeah, we're going to keep right on doing what we're doing?
No regulatory bodies that I am aware of have made any such statements. But as you've noted, there are the medical trade organizations, the dental trade organizations, particularly the American Dental Association, which has been a long time aggressive proponent of fluoridation. And you have, certain advocacy organizations like the American Fluoridation Society. So I would say the usual suspects who have long promoted fluoridation have, provided statements that they continue to support fluoridation despite the court's ruling.
And I've also already seen some press releases that different cities around the United States have already decided to pause the fluoridation of their municipal water supply based on this ruling, which I think that's a very wise, like, let's pause this until we get a more clear and complete picture. But yet other municipalities are just continuing to fluoridate without any concern. So let me tell you my story about fluoridation. So I had a very active practice in Camden, Tennessee, very small town in Midwest Tennessee, that fluoridated its water. And the more I read the research, like I said, I started about 2003-ish looking into this. By 2013, I'm like, there is no reason to not only are we wasting the city of Camden's funds by buying this, because it's literally serving no purpose for the majority of people who are drinking this fluoridated water. It doesn't cause any meaningful decrease in dental caries or cavities. It doesn't cause any meaningful decrease in dental abscesses. And so I started talking to one of my city council members at that time. And the city council member said, oh, yeah, it's fool. I don't know why we do that. We've just always done it, which is why many things continue to be done, because we've always done it that way. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to go talk to the city council about this, because this is foolishness. And so I did that. And so they always publish what's going to happen at the next city council meeting. So when that was published in the newspaper, local dentist, not only the local dentist, but he recruited dentists from Jackson, Tennessee, a larger city near us, and Nashville, Tennessee. And so there were 4 or 5 dentists at this city council meeting, and who were just in an emotional uproar. Like, this is going to destroy the dental health of Camden, Tennessee. We're going to have an epidemic of tooth decay and dental abscesses. And they went into, deep detail about how severe and catastrophic a severe dental abscess can be, which is true. It can be. And I'm like, well, did you bring any evidence with you showing that when you fluoridate the water, that there's a drastic reduction in these cavities? Because I actually brought research that showed that even in cities that don't fluoridate the water and never have fluoridated the water, their decrease in dental cavities went down hand in hand with the cities that did fluoridate. It's almost as if it didn't matter at all. Everybody had fewer dental cavities as time went on in the United States. The first city that ever did this was back in 1945, Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they fluoridated at 1 part per million. Now, the CDC used to recommend 7 parts per million up to 12 parts per million. But now they say, no, 7 parts per million, that's the sweet spot where you get the benefit without any of the negative side effects. And so the city council heard both sides of the argument, me trying to be very logical and unemotional. The dentists were losing their minds. They were very emotional, very upset. They didn't have any evidence. They just kept saying things like, mark my words, the dental health of Camden is going to just go into the dumpster. And so when all was said and done, the city council voted 3 to 2 to remove fluoride from the city water supply. And there were several very vocal citizens there who are like, yeah, we never drink or cook with the city water because we don't want our children's brains to be exposed to this fluoride. And so the local dentist came up to me afterwards and he's like, I hope you're happy. You just destroyed the dental health of Benton County. And I said, well, I tell you what, doctor, I'm not going to say his name. I don't want to embarrass him. I said, I tell you what, I want you to keep meticulous records from this day forward. And if you can come to me in a year or 2 years or 5 years and show me a distinct increase in the rate of dental cavities and dental abscesses in Camden, in any population, children, adults, anybody, I will come back to the city council and I will just as fervently demand that they put the fluoride back in the water. And that was back in 2014. That's when we had it taken out of the city water supply in Camden, Tennessee. I've yet to hear from that dentist or any other dentist that there is an epidemic of cavities or dental abscesses in Benton County. My guess would be that there's been no increase whatsoever. Have you heard similar stories like that in other cities around the United States?
Well, certainly what you've pointed to is, I think, a critical fact, and the science establishes it, which is that whether a community fluoridated or not, whether a country fluoridated its water or not, we see the same decline in tooth decay since the 50s across the board. And one of the, I think, issues we have here in the US is we sort of take a tunnel visioned approach to this fluoridation issue. Dentists focus just on the trends of tooth decay in the United States. So we started fluoridating in the 1940s. We had high levels of cavities at that time. Cavity rates have come down dramatically since then. Ergo, fluoridation is a key public health success. I mean, that's essentially the party line on fluoridation. But once you broaden the lens and you look beyond the US experience and you look to each and every one of the European countries, the vast majority of whom either stopped fluoridating their water or never fluoridated their water in the first place, and they've had the same declines in tooth decay that are here in the United States attributed to water fluoridation. So it doesn't add up. And just 2 weeks ago, the Cochrane Center in the UK, which puts out sort of the gold standard systematic reviews on the efficacy of medical treatments, they just issued a systematic review on the efficacy of water fluoridation on cavities. And they concluded that the evidence today is so weak on the benefits that they can exclude fluoridation having no benefit at all. That's the Cochrane Center. The estimated average reduction for was a quarter of a tooth surface is what it wasn't. I don't believe it was even statistically significant, right?
Correct.
So they could not exclude that fluoridation based on current contemporary data has no benefit at all. And there's a reason for that. That's not an aberration. It's not something that we should be surprised about. And that's because we now know, based on extensive dental research dating back to the 1980s, that fluoride's predominant benefit, and many would say the exclusive benefit of fluoride, doesn't come from swallowing it. It comes from fluoride being in contact with the outside of the tooth, topically in the mouth. And the CDC recognized that in 1999, which was a real paradigm shift and should have, in my view, resulted at that point in the end of water fluoridation, because this is a program that was based on the very notion that kids need to swallow fluoride while their teeth are developing, which is why we added it to drinking water. So now that we know that the predominant benefit, such that there is one, is a topical one, you don't need to swallow it. I think it's very hard to make the case that this is a rational use of fluoride. Like there are, and as you know, there are so many sources of fluoride today, dental products, toothpaste that are readily available. Anyone can get them. They're cheap. They're not expensive. Go to your local grocery store. There's a glut of fluoride toothpaste products. So now that we have this readily available topical fluoride product that you can brush on your teeth and spit out, why are we continuing to add it to drinking water where you maximize the ingestion, which is not effective and poses risk? So I think people really need to scrutinize the, I think, lazy claims that this is an effective program, because contemporary modern science doesn't bear it out.
Let me ask you this question. You brought up the Cochrane collaboration, their recent finding on this, that basically there doesn't appear to be any apparent benefit at all to having fluoride in the drinking water. Cochrane only looks at medical issues and medical treatments. And so I think most people would agree that fluoridation in the water supply at 7 parts per million, because in many parts of the country and the world, there is a naturally occurring 1 part per million of fluoride, 2 parts per million fluoride. That occurs naturally in some places. But going up to 7 parts per million, that's a medical treatment. I don't know if anybody can argue that. So my question is, this is medical treatment without informed consent, is it not? And you're an attorney, so I really want you to speak to the legal aspect of that. Has there been any thought of a class action lawsuit saying, hey, you're medicating me without my informed consent? Is that something that's being looked at by anybody? Or should it be looked at by anybody?
Right. So a couple things there. First, in terms of the concentration of fluoride that we add to our drinking water, just to be clear, it's 0.7 parts per million, not 7. So it's just a decimal point. So 0.7 is what we add to water. And it used to be 1 part per million, but they lowered it now to 0.7. Okay. But to answer to your point on medication, which I think is a really important point, Europe, the main reason why Europe does not fluoridate its water is precisely because Europe determined, most European countries determined, that fluoride is a medicine when you use it to prevent tooth decay, right? And that the water supply is simply not an appropriate way to deliver medicine to those people who want to use it, in part because it deprives people of their right to informed consent, which is a cherished and very important right in medicine, as you are certainly very familiar with. And here in the United States, we have an interesting sort of situation where the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, agrees that when you add fluoride to toothpaste to prevent tooth decay, it's a drug. When you add fluoride to pills, like supplements, for the purpose of preventing tooth decay, it's a drug. But the FDA is essentially relieved itself of any jurisdiction over the addition of fluoride to drinking water for the prevention of tooth decay. But there's no logical reason why adding fluoride to toothpaste to prevent tooth decay is a drug, and adding fluoride to a pill to prevent tooth decay is a drug, but adding fluoride to drinking water is not a drug. I mean, you're doing this, the purpose is the same, the chemical is the same, it's just a different method of administration. And so fluoridation does pose, I think, real bioethical issues. And that, and again, there's no need to deprive people of this choice. There's no need to deprive people of their right to informed consent, given that we have this glut of cheap fluoride products available for those who want it. Now, yes. Lastly, on the question on the law, there have been court cases in the United States in the past that have unfortunately not been successful in challenging fluoridation as a form of involuntary medication. And I think personally, some of those cases were wrongly decided. I think they are ripe for challenge today, moving forward. Now, because some courts have stated in the past that if there was good evidence of harm, presented to the court, that their conclusion may have been different. So now that we have a more advanced, mature body of science, I think that legal question may turn out to be different moving forward. But so far as we stand here today, the courts have not yet been amenable to that theory in the US.
Gotcha. And I'll give you a great medical analogy. If you put lithium, which is an element just like fluorine, it's on the periodic table of the elements. If you put that in a pill, that's a drug, right? Whether you put it in a liquid or a pill form or capsule form or inject, that is a medicine, even though it's just an element. The FDA regulates pills that contain lithium. They regulate every form of administration of lithium, which is just an element, just like fluorine. They regulate that. And so if a municipality said, you know what, our people are just too unruly, we're going to start putting lithium in the water supply. Do you think that the FDA would say, oh, well, since you're putting it in the water, we're not going to consider it a medicine? You think they'd let that slide?
It's a good question. And I think, yeah, that it would be hard to justify, right? But I think once you consider, well, why is it that fluoride is, there's, like you said, there's lithium, there's other things that some people might want to add to the water for some medical benefit, but it's only fluoride. There's no other chemical that's been added to water for a medical purpose other than fluoride. And, I think one of the, remarkable facts here is that if you wanted to get the same dose of fluoride that you drink from your water, and you wanted to get that dose in a pill, okay, in a fluoride supplement, you need to get a prescription from a doctor or a dentist. You can't
Absolutely.
buy it off the shelf. And that's because fluoride's toxicity is such that you need to be very careful about how much you ingest. And yet we're adding that same dose to water with obviously people drink very different amounts of water. Some people drink a lot. Some people don't drink much. And so the notion that you need a prescription to get the same dose of fluoride that we add to water if you want to get it in a pill, I think highlights this very crude medication aspect of this policy.
Absolutely. And what many people don't realize is that there are prescription drugs that contain very high levels of fluoride in the medication. Many of the medications for depression, some antibiotics, they contain a lot of fluoride, and people have no idea. I actually made a YouTube video a few years back and listed all of the prescription medications that contain fluoride. Now, let me be very clear. I think that fluoride used under the supervision of a dentist, and I think Mr. Connett would agree with this. If your dentist says, look, you have a particular tooth issue, you need to use this topical fluoride treatment on your teeth or on your child's teeth, I'm completely for that under the direct supervision of a dentist. What we're saying is, when you put it in the water, everybody drinks it. And so for people who are listening, let me just first say this, and then I want to tell you what else fluoride's in that you may not be thinking about. So when he was talking about the European countries such, backward third world countries like Germany, like Sweden, like Denmark, no city in Germany, Sweden, Denmark, and other European countries, nobody drinks fluoridated water there. Japan, there is no fluoridated water in Japan. China, nobody drinks fluoridated water in China. Now, Israel used to have a mandate, a federal mandate at the country level that all water be fluoridated. They stopped that back in, I think it was 2014, 2015. And now only 70% of the water in Israel is fluoridated. In Canada, only 38% of the water is fluoridated. People in the United States think, well, everybody fluoridates the water, right? But in the US, it's only 70%, give or take, that fluoridates the water. So many communities already in Canada, in Israel, in the United States, there's no fluoride in the water. So if your city is currently fluoridating, and you can actually look this up, I'm going to put a link down in the show notes. I think it's on the CDC's website. You can actually look up your community and see if the water's fluoridated or not. If it is, I would highly recommend you go talk to your city council or your municipal water board and say, hey, get this the hell out of my water. I didn't give you permission to put this in my water. Now, let's go back to infants and young children. Anytime you make infant formula with fluoridated water, you are giving that infant a very high concentration of fluoride based on their body surface area, much higher than you would be giving to an adult. But what about soft drinks? Did you know that the vast majority of soft drinks are made with fluoridated water? What about fruit juice? Most fruit juice, they don't ship it from the orchard straight to the supermarket. That fruit juice is basically dehydrated. They get it down to a very small volume. When it gets to the final destination, they reconstitute it with fluoridated water. And so now all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, we have fluoridated water. We cook with fluoridated water. My kid drinks a Coke every day. That's fluoridated water. My kid has a glass of orange juice every morning. That's fluoridated. So in many cases, then also many of the baby foods, the water they use to make the baby food is fluoridated water. And so you can see it's not just one source of fluoridation that young children are getting. Young children whose brains are developing, whose thyroid glands are actively developing, they're getting a mega dose of fluoride from multiple different sources. That's the thing that worries me is these young children whose parents don't know better or can't afford to do better, and they're giving their kids the soft drinks and the fruit juices and cooking with fluoridated water from the tap. These kids are going to wind up with decreased IQ, and that's going to go with them for the rest of their life. That's not something that you can remediate later down the road. It's a huge problem, and I hope some young, hungry attorney quickly gets a class action lawsuit together and scares the hell out of every water municipality that's currently fluoridating the water, because this has got to stop.
And I would add to that, here in the United States, we are a very fluoridated nation, right? Over half of the world's population that drinks fluoridated water lives here in the US. And as you know, when you add fluoride to water, especially with a mass fluoridation program like we have in the US, that inevitably contaminates processed foods and beverages. So even if fortunately, you're living in a community that doesn't add fluoride to its water, you're still getting fluoridated chemicals through your juices and your sodas and your beers, right? And that's why I think water fluoridation, one of the metaphors and analogies I made at trial is that the water fluoridation program today is analogous to leaded gasoline, where you had, in the 20th century, virtually every single person in this country being exposed to lead in the air as a result of adding it to gasoline. And lead is a powerful neurotoxicant.
Also an element, just like fluorine and just like lithium.
That's right. It's naturally occurring. Doesn't mean it's safe, especially when you're using it in ways that substantially increase human exposure beyond what would occur naturally, right? And so here you had a situation in the 20th century where you had massive exposure across the country to a chemical that we know lowers IQ and causes behavioral problems. And thankfully, finally, after decades, the EPA banned the addition of lead to gasoline. And that's really what the EPA now needs to do with fluoride in water, is ban it. And I think it's difficult for some people, and I understand it's difficult for people to think, well, geez, everyone's exposed to fluoridated water. How could it be a problem? Well, that's what people thought about leaded gasoline too. Everyone was exposed to it. That doesn't mean it's safe, and we know it wasn't safe. And it's particularly problematic when you have such widespread exposure to a toxic chemical and a neurotoxicant, because you have such a range of susceptibility in a population. You're going to have very vulnerable people being exposed to fluoride when you add it to drinking water, right? And so that massive exposure that you have is bound to lead to unintended consequences, damaging consequences. And I would just add one other point, which is a point that some of our experts made at trial, which is when you have a chemical like fluoride that lowers IQ, it's extremely unlikely that the neurological manifestations of fluoride exposure is going to be limited to IQ deficits. IQ deficits happens to be a very standardized measure of neurotoxicity, which is why scientists like to use it, because you can easily compare results. It's, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's, just because that's the metric that's been studied the most with fluoride, it's very unlikely that that's the only neurological effect. And we already have data linking fluoride exposure to behavioral problems like ADHD and whatnot.
Absolutely. And the other part of the human body that really concerns me is the thyroid gland. So for people who have forgotten their chemistry, there's a group of elements called the halogens, which consist of fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine. And they all are very similar in chemical structure. Now, the thyroid gland concentrates iodine. Also, the mammary glands and the salivary glands and other organs as well. But the thyroid is the one everybody knows about. So the problem is on the cell membrane, there's something called a sodium iodide symporter. And it's actually on every cell membrane of every cell in the human body, but there's lots of them on thyroid cells. And they actually actively take up iodine. Unless there's fluorine or fluoride in the circulation, the fluoride can actually block the sodium iodide symporter and prevent iodine from being taken up into the cell. So there's actually research in Europe and other parts of the world that, and also definitely in China, most of it in Chinese that had to be translated, that in areas with very high fluoridation in the water, there's actually an increase in hypothyroidism or underactive thyroid disease. This is a known thing. This has been studied. This has been documented. But yet again, they're still putting it in the water supply without most people don't even know, without their knowledge, but absolutely without their consent. Do you foresee city governments will start maybe putting something on the next ballot saying, hey, do you want us to fluoridate the water or not? Do you think that that's how cities will handle this? Or do you think cities will just say, hey, we're going to pause fluoridation for now until we find out more? Or do you think cities will just go on fluoridating the water?
Oh, it's already happening. There's a number of communities across the country who are already putting fluoridation back on the council's agenda. There's a lot of movement afoot. I think you're going to see in the months ahead a number of communities ending their fluoridation programs, and that's already happening. But I'd like to speak to the thyroid issue here because I agree with you that it's very important to consider. And I would start by, we think about fluoride, and when you think about it from a medical perspective, we all think about fluoride and tooth decay, right? Fluoride's a drug to prevent cavities. Well, fluoride was a drug used for another purpose back in the 30s, all the way through the 70s in some areas in Europe and South America. And namely, it was a drug used to reduce thyroid activity in patients with hyperthyroidism, overactive thyroid, right? And fluoride was found to be effective and at relatively low doses at lowering that thyroid activity, which for those patients was a therapeutic benefit, right? So there's been a longstanding concern that, well, if fluoride lowers thyroid function in hyperactive thyroid patients, well, could it be lowering thyroid activity in people with normal thyroid or people with underactive thyroid? And there's animal studies to support that, yes, fluoride can do that. And I think most important here is we now have a study from Canada published last year, Hall 2023, which looked at pregnant moms and looked at whether there is a relationship between the fluoride levels in drinking water and hypothyroidism, underactive thyroid in the mother. And the study found a significant relationship between fluoridated water at the levels that we fluoridate for for oral health and increased incidence of hypothyroidism. And another study from the UK, published in 2015 by Peckham, they found on a population level that there was a correlation between the levels of fluoride in drinking water and hypothyroidism. And, hypothyroidism is a condition that, has many different, effects and can, as you know, it's the master gland for regulating many things in our body. So it's a serious condition. But when we're talking about the neurological manifestations of fluoride, when you disrupt, if you have underactive thyroid as a pregnant mom,
big deal.
It's an absolute established fact that will lower the IQ of the child. It's not a question. That is a known, very clear and important risk factor for cognitive impairments in the child. So it's like essential that a pregnant mom has optimal levels of thyroid hormone. So, that finding from Canada, that water levels, the fluoride levels in water are significantly linked to hypothyroidism, should be a major red flag. I mean, even if you didn't have the IQ data that we now have on fluoride, that would be by itself a major reason for approaching this chemical very cautiously, because you don't want to be doing anything that can disturb the thyroid gland.
Absolutely. And let's be very clear, fluoride has never been established to be an essential mineral. No, and even no medical body has ever even tried to claim that fluoride is an essential mineral. And I've actually heard dentists say that it is. But when you look at the ADA and other, they do not say that at all, because they know that'd be foolish. It's obviously not an essential mineral. Where do you see this going in the future? We've already talked about city municipal water systems pausing fluoridation. And I think that's great, because it's going to save cities a lot of money, because it's expensive to do that. And also the workers have to wear hazmat suits when they're putting the fluoride in the water, because it is so toxic. Not joking, look it up. What else do you see happening? What about the big food corporations, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Tropicana? Do you think that they'll quickly see that maybe there's a marketing edge here if we say that our Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Dr. Pepper and Mountain Dew are made with fluoride-free water?
I think that could certainly happen in the future when there's greater public awareness of fluoride's health risks. I don't think we're there yet I think in part because of the media hasn't really adequately covered the fluoride issue. So we don't yet have that level of public awareness where there's the public demand for Coca-Cola and other processed beverage makers to provide a fluoride-free, alternative. But I certainly think, that's a real possibility as we move forward, once people learn about this court ruling and other recent research.
I've noticed that corporate media has been very quiet about this district court ruling. Why do you think that is? I've seen very few headlines.
Well, I mean, on one hand, we've gotten more media coverage out of this court ruling than probably any other fluoride development that I've been involved with in my time working on this issue. So that's been a plus. But on the other hand, you're not seeing like coverage on cable news or the kind of, channels that would really get a public awareness, So, and that's been a longstanding pattern. It's, and there's other reasons for, obviously people are really interested in the election. It's hard to break through that. But, we don't have the public discourse on fluoride has been lacking for a long time. And my hope has always been that we see that dialogue, that we see it evolve into something more intelligent, something more sophisticated, and not this dumbed down notion that we've had for so long that if you don't have fluoride in your water, your teeth are going to fall out, you're going to have horrible tooth decay. And, if you like teeth, get fluoride, right? it's been, there's science says fluoride is great, and then there's a few crazy people who say it's bad. And that's that kind of narrative framework that we've had for so long has kept many people from even bothering to look at what the science is saying. And so, and I think we are seeing changes there, which gives me encouragement that people are starting to look at fluoride like another toxicant, right? You have lead, you have arsenic, you have fluoride. These are toxicants in our food, in our water. We need to look at it with that in mind. Like, let's be careful about exposing ourselves unnecessarily to very toxic chemicals. And that's what I'm hoping we will see more of moving forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm hoping that this recent ruling in the Northern District of California will move Overton's window enough so that it'll be considered acceptable to at least have a discussion about water fluoridation. Do you mind? Let's take a few questions.
Please, yeah.
All right. Jeff says, what toothpastes don't have fluoride? Does the Fluoride Action Network, do you guys have a list on your website?
We don't. I mean, we've really been careful, and I don't formally work for Fluoride Action anymore, but I certainly, consult, and I'm very familiar with the organization. But the Fluoride Action Network has never, attempted to recommend any type of toothpaste. It's not what we do. But I can tell you that there are many brands out there that do not contain fluoride. And there's brands that have like some fluoride versions and then some non-fluoride versions. And I think if you go to most grocery stores, while the vast majority of toothpaste will contain fluoride, if you look, there should be in each grocery store, there's usually at least one fluoride-free alternative.
Yep. And I can tell you guys from personal experience, Redmond's has several of their toothpaste do not have added fluoride. Boca, B-O-K-A, that's what we use. It has no fluoride added. And then also Tom's toothpaste has several varieties that are not fluoridated. Let's see what else we've got here. I don't know what that means. Yeah. So Amy says, what about soda companies and companies that make juice? Yeah, it's absolutely fluoridated in the majority of cases. Are there any other sources of fluoride that maybe we wouldn't think about, Mr. Connett, that like, oh, I didn't even consider whether that had fluoride in it?
Yes. And as you've already mentioned, there's on the pharmaceutical side with organofluorine medications like Cipro. There, some pharmaceuticals that have the fluorine atom, not all of them necessarily will break down into fluoride ion in the body, but some do, and that's an important source. Anesthetics. If you have a young child who's going to be undergoing surgery and needs to get anesthesia, some of these anesthetics, unfortunately, a lot of them are fluorinated, and that will result in a real big spike in your child's blood fluoride levels. And so you might want to talk to your doctor to see if there's if you have to, in the unfortunate situation where your child needs to go under anesthesia, you might want to talk to your doctor about a non-fluoridated option. And then here's another source, and it's an unfortunate one, but tea. Okay. A lot of the tea plant is an accumulator. It accumulates fluoride in the soil. And this is exacerbated in part by the fact that we use a lot of phosphate fertilizers for agriculture. And phosphate fertilizer has a lot of fluoride in it. And the tea plant just absorbs that fluoride. So if you're drinking like a lot, like, black tea or green tea, those can have, some substantial fluoride levels. Here's a sort of a tip advice I would give to those people who do like tea. And that is that the fluoride content of tea is actually it correlates with the quality of the tea. And it does so this way. The highest quality teas, like white teas, come from tea plants that are very young when they're harvested. because the younger the tea leaf, the more antioxidants it has, which is the stuff that we want, right? And the less fluoride it has. So if you're a connoisseur of teas, you really like teas, you might look to see what teas are available that really use younger tea leaves, because you're going to have less fluoride and more antioxidants. The other thing, if you're pregnant, I would certainly advise you might want to cut down on your tea consumption during the course of the pregnancy.
Very good advice. Michelle asked, does bottled water like Dasani and other major brands, do they contain fluoride?
Thankfully, most bottled waters in the United States, like Dasani, have very low levels, or they have low levels of fluoride. Typically, about 0.1 part per million, sometimes less. And that's because even like Dasani, which I believe is a filtered water, they're using, a pretty advanced reverse osmosis technology, which is going to take away most of the fluoride. So for most bottled waters, you're going to be substantially reducing your fluoride intake versus drinking it from the tap. But there are a few exceptions to that rule. And the general exception here is if it's coming from like deep springs, okay, like highly mineralized waters, okay, be careful. And if you're drinking some of those types of bottled water, just call the company, ask them how much fluoride is in there. They will know.
Yep. And many of the water companies actually have it on their website, that exactly what their filtration process entails. And if it does entail reverse osmosis or distillation, then it's going to be very, very low in fluoride. But I will tell you, I've looked into the water thing, and some of the cheaper waters, definitely the generic bottled waters, in many cases, it's just a city water from whatever city that their water plant happens to be in. They might run it through a filter to remove the chlorine, but many chlorine filters do not remove fluoride. So many of the cheaper bottled waters, it's just like drinking city tap water. And if that city municipality fluoridates their water, there's going to be fluoride in that water.
Yes, I think on that front, it's if you have a regular bottled water that you are consuming, it's a good practice just to call the company or look at their website, find out what the fluoride level is. You want it less than 0.2 parts per million, ideally below 0.1. Yes. But if you're using a single brand, find out what the fluoride level is. I would also note on the water filtration side, any like the pure water filters, any water filter that uses activated carbon, okay, is not going to remove fluoride. So just be mindful of that. If it's activated carbon, like pure Brita, not removing the fluoride.
Yep. And that's Michelle's question. Do standard fridge filters remove fluoride? If a filter, whether it's Brita or Pure or whoever, if it does remove fluoride, they're going to brag about that. Okay. Because that's actually a kind of a step up in the filtration process. And so if their filter does remove fluoride, it's going to say that on the front of the container that you bought the filter in. They'll be proud of that. They'll be bragging about that. So if it does not say, because most of them remove chlorine and then solid particulate matter and some flavors and odors, but if they remove fluoride, it'll say it on the package because they'll want you to know that. Yep. Michael Connett, thank you so much for doing this. I think this is super important. I appreciate you coming on today and talking about this very, very important topic. I'm going to be sharing this all over the internet. Obviously, I believe that no one should be drinking fluoridated water. I've been actively working and campaigning against it since 2014, as is in the public record in Camden, Tennessee, and I will continue to fight against it. Let's be clear once again, and let's restate this because a lot of people think this is conspiratorial in some way. Neither Mr. Connett nor I are saying that if your dentist recommends fluoride to you for a specific reason, you should do that. Your dentist is a tooth expert and they understand the potential risk of too much fluoride. If they say, no, I understand why you're afraid of fluoride, but here's why you need it, then you need to listen to your dentist. But if you're drinking fluoridated water, if you're cooking with fluoridated water, if you're drinking fruit juice that's reconstituted with fluoridated water, if you're drinking soft drinks that are made with fluoridated water, you probably need to stop that. Mr. Connett, thank you so much for doing this. I know you're going to continue fighting this cause, and so will I.
Thank you, Dr. Berry. I really appreciate our conversation today. So thank you.
Thank you.